Okay, hi. Going to run through this project now that I tried to complete in class, but unfortunately I ran out of time. So, what I was aiming to achieve here was I was wanting to build an example of a full stack application that interacts with a database using Bootstrap. So the process I went through when I started was I created just the three basic files. I'm not going to go into like the JavaScript and how that's all working. I'm just going to go through the process that I've been through, and then hopefully your experience of JavaScript will come as you learn that. So the first thing we've got here is we've got our index.html file, which should just be very familiar to you. We had a stylings file. I didn't end up putting much in that. And then we've got our JavaScript file, which has got like the meat and potatoes of the work for the front end. And the first process that I went through was I wanted to build up the application and just try and build the asynchronous behavior. So if we squash these down, so we can squash these down and then we'll go through them individually. So we've got these functions that I've created here. And the first one that I created was this one here, where I was going to an example website called JSON placeholder to be able to go and grab some data from it and bring it back to the front end. So I wanted to use asynchronous behavior to be able to do that. So we're literally doing a fetch, and then we should bring back some data, and then this data we can console log it out to have a look at it. So if we just go to this one here where we could run this function. Just one moment. Where we could run this function here, this JSON placeholder, and we could just check to see if we're actually getting the data back. So let's just check to see whether we're getting some data back. So I'm just going to spin this up as we normally would here, and then if I open the console over here, let's just get rid of that. Let's hit save on this. Oh, I've got to close it. Sorry, I just got to close it because I just had to close it because I'd forgot to merge in the work that I'd done to this main branch. Right, so yeah, so we've got this function here which I was using to be able to get data from a website that has data that you can call back asynchronously. So if we just run that here, so we can run this function, and then I can just console log this out to make sure that we are actually getting this data back without building the screen. So if I do that, and then I run this, now if we look in the terminal, we can see that we're getting all the data back from this website here. So I then went on to actually build out a screen that I wanted to show this data on. So this is where this create card function comes in here. So this is just creating a card for each one of those responses, but I'm just limiting the responses to, oh, this should have a slice on it. This one here, sorry. Let's comment that out. To just the first 48 of them. So now if we run this, we can see that we get a card now for each 48 of them that came back. So once I got to this point, I was like, okay, right, I'm happy now. I know that I can work asynchronously, can bring data back, I can display it on the screen, I can utilize the different bits of that data that's coming back to make up this card that we're looking at. So then I thought, right, well, what I want to do is then just try and use some of my own data. So then I created a local server. So I created this JSON file of data here, which has 12 records in it. And now I wanted to try and populate those cards with that data. So if I moved on from this and change that, and I use this other function that I created now, which was for a local server, which is going to that JSON file to be able to bring it back. And then we console log this data out. Let's just have a look to see whether this is working. So if we go back to the website, we open up our terminal, we can see sure enough we're getting 12 records come back, and we've got access to each one of these bits of information that's inside of it, which we can then use to build the cards. So now if I came back here and I reintroduce this function that builds the cards now, and I hit save. Let's just close that because that's being a pain. And we can close that as well. So if we open up the web page now, we can see that we've got 12 cards on the screen that's now being populated from that data that we've got locally inside our application. Right, so now we're comfortable. We know that we can create our own data and bring it through to the front end and be able to utilize it. So we want to make the next big step, which is to move on and actually bring this data back from a RESTful API, which is a backend. So what I did was I created a folder here called Backend, and this is a Node.js backend that we've got. So the first thing that you have to do when you build a Node.js backend is I would have to cd into this folder, backend like this, and then you do npm install. So when you clone this down, this is the first thing that you would do, is do npm install, which will install this node modules folder here. But I've already done that, so I don't need to do that. And then what I did was I imported some packages that I needed to use. So again, I'm not going to go into all this and how this is all working, but let's just understand that you need to bring these packages in to be able to actually do the tasks that you want this to do. And then I created a script that I can run to be able to actually run this backend. So the entry point into the backend is the index.js file. I think so it says that your entry point inside here in your package file tells you that this is your entry point. So what I did was I came in here and I brought back some known learnings that I got from other applications that I've built of what you need to be able to actually create a RESTful API. But the actual main thing, and the only thing that you really need, is Express. You could do it all just by bringing in this package of Express, but I brought in a few other things. And then what I did was I created this point, this HTTP endpoint here of /. So this is called a get command. HTTP has 6 requests I think you can do, and get is one of them. So if we actually run this, so we saw that script a moment ago, so I do npm run dev like this, and that's this script here that I'm running, this one here. It says that this is now running on 8080. So if we went to our browser and we put in localhost 8080 and we just go to / like that, we can see that we're receiving that response that we had in our index.html file. Just close that one a second. In our index.js file, which was this one here. So that's great. So like I know everything is up and running now, and I've got a working backend that can receive HTTP requests. So what I next needed to do was I needed to add a database. So I wanted a database to be able to hold this data that we've got in this JSON file, and then be able to like do CRUD functionalities with that database. So I decided to use a NoSQL database. It can literally be any type of database, but if I created a NoSQL database, then it's all kind of encapsulated within this code here. and you don't need like a server somewhere or anything holding your database. You could have like a local SQL database, you could have a local MongoDB database, you could do all sorts, but I just chose to use a NoSQL database. So the first thing that I needed to do was create a database. So this is the bit that's actually going to create my local database for me. And then I needed two functions. One to actually create a table inside this database, which is called comments. And then another function that was going to actually put some data into that database for me. So what it's doing here is it's going to this JSON file and iterating over the contents of that file and inserting it into the database for me with this statement here, this insert statement. So if I run that, so if I, let's just kill this terminal. And if we ran that, I created a script here in my package.json, which was to create DB. And what this does is inside this migrations file here, oh, I just need to delete that because it's been created. Inside this migrations file, it actually runs those two functions for me. So it's just importing them and then running them. So it was just to enable me to have a script that I could use to be able to create the database, because I don't want it to create a database, create the contents and the table every time we're doing like a call to it or whatever. So now if I do an npm run create db like that, we can see that this database has been created for us now. And if we bring up the palette by doing Control-Shift-P, we can open the database. This is utilizing, an extension that I've installed here in Visual Studio Code, which is SQLite. So if you install that extension, you can utilize this in the palette. And then you get this down here, this SQL Explorer. Sorry, I forgot to increase the size of everything. And then if we expand that, we can see our table of comments, and it has this little play button on it. And if we press that, we can see, sure enough, we've got 12 records in here, and these are our 12 records that we've got inside this. Right, so the next bit that we need to do is we've got a database, we've got a table in our database, we've got data inside our database. The next thing we need to do is bring that to the front end. So we need to create an endpoint for that. So the same as we created this get endpoint, we can now create a get endpoint and give it a different endpoint, so comments. And here we can say, okay, we're going to do a select of comments from the database, and then we're going to return that selected comments as a JSON file to the front end. So on the front end, we need to go into our app.js file, and now I've got a fetch REST API function here. And in this, it's just exactly the same as the two above. It's using the same code. But this time we're getting, this is actually talking to our backend, our very own backend. And we could check this again. So if we run this data one here, so let's just comment these out, and we'll just run this here. We can just do it this way. Let's just get rid of that one. Like this. So now if we hit save on that, we just need to make sure our backend is running. So it's not currently running at the moment. If we went to our code, our front end, you can see we're getting errors because the backend isn't running. So if we change that, so we do npm run dev on the backend inside our backend folder, we can see it's telling us that it's running. And now if we refresh this page on the front end, we can see that we're getting 12 responses from our own personal database, from our own REST API now. So that's great. So now we want to just inject that response now into the cards on the screen. So if we comment this out and we hit save, we can now see that we've got those 12 items here on our screen, and this matches back to what's in the database. So the last bit that we've got left to do was to create some CRUD functionality. So I've not done it all for you. I thought I would leave the other bits, and then if you wanted to have a go at doing them yourself, then that would be great. But I created one for add. So what I did was, let's just close that. So what I did was I went into my index.html file and I added some bootstrap. So I added this bootstrap here, which will give me a modal for putting in this data. So you can see it's a modal, which then has a form inside the modal, which takes in the three elements that are in the database: the name, the email, and the body. So if we go back to our actual application and we hit add, we can see that this modal opens up for us now, and we can put in whatever and then try and send this to the back end. So to be able to achieve that on the back end, what do we need? Right, we need to go back into our front-end app.js file, and we need a function now that is going to listen to that modal, and when that submit button happens, we want to capture the data from the form, which is what's happening here in this. So this is listening to that form, and when the submit happens, it's capturing that data, and then I'm putting this into this function of func create comment. So this function here, create comment, is now doing similar to this above, but instead of doing a get, which is just the default here, so it defaults to get, we're now doing a post. So post means we want to put something into the database. So it's taking the comments that I've got, turning them into a JSON file, and then sending them off to the back end with this fetch as a post. And then the back end is returning a new set of data with this added item, and then I'm doing the create card again, the same function that I used down here, to be able to create a new lot of data on the screen with the added card. So that's great. So that's the front end sorted out. We need a recipient of that on the back end, so an endpoint. So we go back to our back end, into our index.js file, and inside here we've got our post response. So this is waiting to receive something from the front end. And here we can see that we've got this request body that we're destructuring to be able to get the email, the name, the email, and the body. And then we're using that to put that into the database. And then once we put that into the database, we're doing a select from the database again and sending the response, just exactly the same as what we did up here with the new data included. So if we go back to our application and we put in test, we put in test here, and then we just put in test some body text or something like that. And then we hit save. We can see that the screen refreshes, and now we've got our new data entry in here. So the bits that I haven't done for you is you've got like an edit and delete on each one of these cards. So if you wanted to try and have a go at creating the edit and the delete. So what does that require? That requires, here on the front end, I've already put the functions in place, a function for updating the item in the database, and a function for deleting the item in the database. So you're going to need something to listen to those buttons, which means that you're going to have to create something, an alteration in here on these two buttons that are being created for each card. And then you're going to need to listen to that, something to listen to that, and then execute one of these two functions depending on which button's been clicked. And then you will need a recipient on the back end, an endpoint. So another function in here. So for an update, it's most likely going to be a put, which is this one here, the put. And then if it's a delete, it's going to be a delete. So yeah, that's what you need to do to be able to complete it. So I know there's loads of code in here that we haven't covered yet in class, and this is a big step forward. But because I'm not covering being here for like all your teachings, and you'd shown an interest in knowing about full stack, I thought I'd just create this and then you can have a play with it yourself. Okay, thank you.